Привет everyone! Today I want to talk to you about laning phase. This video will be useful for all 4 lanes. Yes, I said 4, because jungle is a lane too, even though it is shaped in a weird form. This guide won't have any knowledge that is specific for only one role. Instead, I want to talk about core ideas of laning phase, about things a player in every role needs to understand to be successful. Let's start with a simple question. What is a laning phase? Usually when people say laning phase, they refer to the first 10 minutes of the game. Truth is that laning phase lasts until any of tier 1 towers die. This means that in theory laning phase can last from 5 minutes and to the infinity. But in practice, even in the most passive games, tier 1 towers start dying around minute 15, which is around the time when turret plating disappears. Everyone distinguishes laning phase from the rest of the game. It's like you play one game before 15 minutes, and after 15 minutes you play a completely different game. This is complete truth, because whole following games depends on how the team performs during the laning phase. Usually, if one of the teams gets an advantage in the laning phase, she wins the whole game. Especially if you are talking about solo queue games. Even the best solo queue player in the world, Topa, said that in his opinion League of Legends is a game that lasts 15 minutes. Obviously this statement is a little bit too specific, because he was talking about highest elo solo queue games, and most of us aren't anywhere close to Chinese or Korean challenger. In lower elos, players often win the laning phase, but don't do anything about it, because they don't understand how to translate their advantage on a map. However, the higher you go in terms of your rating, the better players will use advantage they got during the laning phase. This is why, in my opinion, it is important to understand how to win laning phase right now, even if you are in the lower elo. So, how do you win laning phase? First thing that you need to understand is that to win laning phase doesn't mean to kill your opponent multiple times and to kill his tier 1 tower. To win laning phase means to get more experience and gold than him. Weirdly enough, you can do this without even touching your opponent. Moreover, often it is way riskier to try to get kills than to just farm. This is where we realize that we have two ways of getting more experience and gold than your opponent. We can play aggressively and trade with our opponent, or we can play passively and focus on farming. So, first thing that you should do when you get into the lane is to understand how you should play your lane. Honestly, this should be done by you already during the peak band stage, but this requires you to already have some experience. How you should play your lane mostly depends on champions. All champions can be divided into two types, those who can aggressively trade and those who can sustain well. Champion type depends on their abilities and basic stats. Aggressive champions usually have strong damaging abilities, damage focus passive, or they just have a lot of healing of some sort. When you are playing on aggressive champion, you should look for constant fight with your opponent, because it will be impossible for them to outdamage you, or to heal incoming damage faster than you. If you will be playing passive on the aggressive champion, you will just waste their potential and lose lane, because passive champions inherently get more from farming. Let's bring up some examples. For top lane it will be Darius, Jayce, Garen and Fiora. Darius and Jayce are very straight up examples. All of their abilities and passive bring up some damage. Garen and Fiora are slightly different. While they both have a lot of damage in their abilities, they also have a lot of healing through their passives. For jungle we have Xin Zhao, Udyr, Olaf and Shaco. Xin Zhao and Udyr have slow clears, because they don't have any strong AoE abilities. Instead they have abilities that are focused on the single target damage. This is why it is so good for them to force early 1v1 skirmishes. Olaf and Shaco are a little bit different. They have good jungle clears, but they slowly fall off with the time, which forces them to be proactive during the early game. For mid lane it will be Zed, LeBlanc, Orianna and Syndra. Zed and LeBlanc have 4 damage focused abilities, and even their passives help them during the fights. Orianna and Syndra have a little bit different playstyle. Instead of going for a prolonged all-in fights, they focus on constantly poking their opponent with their low cooldown abilities. For bot lane we have Draven, Tristana, Varus and Caitlyn. Draven is the ultimate aggressor in the bot lane, because he has everything to help him with that. All of his abilities focused on damage. Draven's passive gives him additional gold when he gets kills, and he has highest base regen from all ADCs in the game. Tristana has second highest base regen in the game, plus all of her abilities are focused on damage. Varus and Caitlyn share one unique advantage over other ADCs. During the early game their auto attack range is way bigger than any other ADC attack range. This doesn't let them straight away kill their opponent, but it lets them to constantly harass their opponents without taking any retaliation damage. For supports we have Soraka, Nami, Leona and Brand. Both Soraka and Nami have incredible healing abilities, which let them trade with the opponent and then heal all the damage they or their ADC received. All of Leona's abilities are capable of dealing damage, plus amount of card control that she has lets her to lock down any champion on her own lane or in the other lanes if she decided to roam. Brand also has 4 abilities that are focused on dealing damage, but on top of that, his abilities have very long range, way bigger than even auto attacks of any ADC in the game. This lets him damage his opponents while not taking any damage back. There is one more thing that I want to bring to your attention, but that isn't tied up to any lane. It is especially good to play aggressive if your team has global or semi-global ultimates. I'm talking about champions like Shen, Twisted Fate, Karthus, or Ziggs, Ryze and Xerath. Often your solo queue opponents will forget about those abilities, which will result in free kills for your team. Sustained champions usually have good regen or defensive abilities. When you are playing on them, your goal is to just calmly farm out until you will get your core items. Your dream lane usually looks like this. Your opponent is trying to inflict damage on you, but every time he's doing it, you either use your defensive abilities and mitigate this damage to a point where it doesn't matter, or you trade health with him. But your regen is so good that you get back to full health right before he can try to play aggressive once again. Let's bring up some examples. For top lane it will be Garen, Fiora, Malphite, Maokai and Nasus. Garen and Fiora aren't really defensive champions. If matchup allows, you should play them aggressively. However, both Garen and Fiora have one defensive ability, and both of them have ways to heal themselves. This means that if they are in a bad matchup, they can be played as sustained champions. Way more iconic sustained champion is Malphite. His passive gives him shield that can mitigate a lot of damage, and his abilities are focused on making his opponent deal less damage. Maokai and Nasus are classic sustained champions too. Both of them has great passives that help them to heal damage they received. For jungle we have Graves, Sejuani, Fiddlesticks and Warwick. Both Graves and Sejuani have ways to ignore jungle camp's damage. For Graves it is his buckshot and grid passives. For Sejuani it is her passive shield. These champions can clear camps while not losing health, plus they scale well into a late game. Fiddlesticks and Warwick have abilities that let them heal themselves from the damage they receive from camps. For mid lane we have Anivia, Ziggs, Vladimir and Kassadin. Anivia and Ziggs are interesting champions, because their sustain comes from ability to clear minions without even interacting with their lane opponent. Vladimir is built around constant self-healing from his abilities. Kassadin's passive makes him take reduced magic damage. He also has abilities that gives him shield. Plus, nowadays people take runes that give him a lot of healing. For bot lane we have Caitlyn, Senna, Ezreal and Sivir. As we already talked, Caitlyn is the best when played aggressive, but because she outranges any ADC during the early game, she can farm from safe distance if needed. Senna's main ability lets her heal herself up if she takes unfavorable trade. Ezreal and Sivir can clear waves without interacting with their lane opponents. Ezreal is capable of doing it by using his Q from a big distance, while Sivir can clear whole wave with 2 abilities after she gets a little bit of AD. Also, they have great defensive abilities. For support we have Soraka, Lulu, Braum and Morgana. Soraka should be played as an aggressive champion, but because of her ability to heal herself and her ADC, she can be played as defensive champion if situation calls for it. Lulu and Braum can't really aggress onto their opponents, due to the fact that their abilities have small range, but they can shield their ADC or themselves. Morgana's shield can mitigate only magic damage, but it also can mitigate every crowd control that is being used, so it is good for defensive play too. Now let's talk about 3 phases of laning phase. I've never seen a video where anyone broke down laning phase into smaller parts, and I don't understand why. Fact is that you play differently between -1 and 5, between -5 and 10, and between -10 and 15. Phase between minute 1 and 5 is truly unique for a number of reasons. First of all champions on the map get the abilities one by one. This means that you have to rethink how are you supposed to play your matchup, depending on abilities that you and your opponent have. For example, some aggressive champions can't play aggressively until level 3, because they need to have all 3 abilities to be efficient. Secondly, turrets have a passive called Fortification during the first 5 minutes. This means that there is no real reason to hard push minion waves or attack tower if you got successful gank as a jungler. For example, as a ranged champion against melee champion, you can hard push waves right from the start of a game, but there is no reason to do it in the first 5 minutes, because you won't be able to get turret plating gold anyway. Instead, it is better to slow push waves and zone your opponent from minion gold and experience. Thirdly, items that you buy are made to help you during this early time, but they can't drastically change the way matchup will be played. Certain champions get certain power spikes from items, and these power spikes let them to play in a certain way for some time. For example, Aurelia before she gets Botork usually prefer to play a little bit more passive, even though she is an aggressive champion. This fact cannot be changed with your first buy. It doesn't matter did you buy Doran's Sword or Corruption Potion as Aurelia. If you are supposed to play defensively until level 6, no static item can change that. Fourth thing that you need to understand is that usually your first buy is the most important. For example, there is a big difference between Sivir with BF Sword after her first back and Sivir that was able to buy 2 long swords and a Call. Sivir with BF Sword usually able to shove lanes in a matter of seconds, completely ignoring her opponent, while Sivir with long swords and Call can't do that as fast. All those features of the first 5 minutes of laning phase lead us to one simple idea. Even if you are playing an aggressive champion, it is better to focus on the farm first and on the aggression second during this time period. Laning phase between minutes 5 and 10 has own strong features. During this time, aggressive champions acquire their ultimate. This allows them to shine in their full strength and forces sustained champions to be extremely cautious. Overall, this time period is completely focused on playing around turret plates. Aggressive champions are trying to get as many plates as possible, and sustained champions are trying to defend plates. By the way, this goes both for laners and junglers, because aggressive junglers are ganking lanes in order to kill turret plates, while sustained junglers focus on counter-ganking in order to defend those plates. One mistake during this time period can lead to a huge gold leads, so it is important to understand clearly what are you supposed to do in your matchup during this time. If both sides played first 2 parts of laning phase well, usually at minute 10 both aggressive and sustained champions get their first item and boots. This ends up in a situation where aggressive champions can kill sustained champions only if sustained champions are leaving the safety of their turret. As a result, laning phase between minute 10 and 15 is mostly focused on getting objectives like Herald or Dragon. If team is focused on getting Herald, it means that this team want to snowball game through gold that they will get from turret plates. On the other hand, if team is focused on Dragon, it means that they want to slowly scale up and try to win through Dragon Soul or Elder Dragon. Obviously, teams that mostly consist of aggressive champions prefer to get Herald, while teams that mostly consist of passive champions would rather get Dragon. Anyway, no matter what type of champion you are playing, aggressive or sustained, try to focus on a big picture and help your team if there will be a big team fight during this time. Let's wrap up what we've learned today. The way you should play laning phase mostly depends on what type of champion you are playing. Aggressive champions should try to trade with their opponent, while sustained champions should try to get as much farm as possible. No matter what type of champion you are playing, between minus 1 and 5 prioritize farm over trades. Between minus 5 and 10 focus on abusing strong side of your champion, either play super aggressively or super defensively. And between minus 10 and 15 try to help your team on the map, rather than being in your lane. I hope this guide helped you, and always remember, your goal during laning phase is to get more gold and experience than your opponent, not necessarily kill them. Have a nice day.